Chapter 7 Trouble at School. Jared was just getting up as Joseph put on his coat. Wish I could go to school like you. It's not much fun, Joseph answered. If you don't know your lessons, the teacher makes you sit on a stool in front of the room and everyone makes fun of you. Do you ever have to do that? Jared asked. Joseph shook his head. Not yet, but I might if my penmanship doesn't improve. You just be glad Mama teaches you. The weather was bitingly cold. Joseph tucked his nose into his coat, trying to stay warm. He looked for his new friend, but Zachary was absent again. Miss Graham rang the bell just as he arrived, and everyone filed in. Good morning, students, she said, as she did every morning. Good morning, Miss Graham, came the echoing chorus. Elias Hawkins brought in a big load of extra wood to feed the fire. He dropped it into a wooden box near the stove with a clatter. Miss Graham looked unhappy. She tapped her ruler on the desk. Elias, that's supposed to be done before school starts, she said sharply. Elias ducked his head. Sorry, ma'am, he said. He scurried to his seat. The school board paid Elias $20 a year to sweep out the school every day and start the fire on wintry mornings. Joseph thought $20 sounded like a princely sum, but he knew Elias gave it all to his mother. Since Elias's father died of cholera the year before, his mother supported them by working in Mr. Lippett's bookstore. An unwanted thought came to Joseph's mind. If not for Mr. Byers, he would be no better off than Elias. I'll give you 5 minutes to study for your spelling test, announced Miss Graham. I want absolute silence. Miss Graham sat at her desk grading papers. Joseph took out his book and stared at the list. Whomp! Something hit the back of his neck. Ouch! He yelled, jumping up, nearly knocking over the bench and forgetting Miss Graham's order for silence. Miss Graham stood. Explain yourself, young man. Why are you disturbing my class? I'm sorry, Miss Graham, Joseph said, trying to sound sincere. I got a sudden cramp in my hand. It hurts something awful. Miss Graham's eyes narrowed. Hold out your hands, Joseph, she said. Reluctantly, Joseph did as he was told. He squeezed his eyes shut and waited. Miss Graham smacked her pointer stick 2 times across his outstretched hands. Now that, she said, no doubt did hurt something awful. Without another word, she returned to the corner. There was a snicker from the back of the room, and another spitball hit Joseph in the head. Andrew laughed out loud. Miss Graham turned. One more laugh, and you will receive the same punishment, young man, she said. Andrew's head bent down over his practice slate. Satisfied, Miss Graham returned to her papers. Joseph pretended to study his spelling, but his eye scanned the room. Everyone seemed hard at work, but Joseph spied the top of a pea shooter in the pocket of a boy named Ethan. Ethan looked up from his book and stared at him. He patted the pea shooter, taunting Joseph. Across the room, David Baker, the Quaker boy, gave him a sympathetic look. Joseph knew some of the boys picked on David because of his strange speech and wide brimmed hat. He had noticed that David never fought back. Joseph looked at his hands. The ruler had made a wide red streak across them. He was so angry over the injustice, he could hardly concentrate. Even the girls seemed to be against him. From across the room, one of them held up her slate. Yankee Spy was written in big letters. When he scowled, Several other girls giggled. They received a sharp look from Miss Graham. It seemed that Joseph was going to pay for his stepfather's views, whether he agreed with them or not. The morning continued in the same manner. Every time Miss Graham looked away, a spitball hit Joseph. At lunchtime, everyone tumbled out into the small play yard at the back of the school. Joseph took his bucket and slipped out the front door, hoping to avoid his tormentors. The school sat on a small hill not far from the business section of town. The stone steps were cold, but Joseph sat down on the top stair and opened his lunch. This time of day, traffic on the main street was heavy. Women shopped in the busy row of stores there. Their skirts were so wide that a gentleman walking from the other direction had to tip his hat and step out into the street to let them pass. Several large wagons rumbled by, heading for the train yard. Joseph heard the mournful whistle as the noon train began prepared to leave the station. He loved to watch the trains as they chugged into town and stopped for passengers and mail and goods being shipped to other cities. Some people complained that trains were noisy and dirty. It was true, but he loved them just the same. He thought his stepfather might feel that way too, although they had never talked enough for him to find out. He did know that Mr. Byers had been one of the people who had fought to bring the trains through the town. Everyone had respected his opinion in those days, before he decided to be an abolitionist. Before the trains, everything had been shipped by canals to the Ohio River, where it could be loaded on large barges and ships. But shipping by canal was slow. Now, most had been allowed to fall into disrepair and dry up. Miss Graham had told the class that the towns still depending on the canals were dying. Even the people who hadn't wanted the railroad now admitted it was a good thing. Joseph nibbled on his lunch of bread, cheese, and a piece of cold pork left from dinner the night before. He could see his stepfather's sash and door factory from where he sat. Usually, it was a busy place, with wagons being unloaded or finished orders being readied for delivery. This morning, however, it seemed quiet. Mr. Byers's unpopular views certainly seemed to be affecting his business. "Art thou all right, Joseph?" David Baker asked, coming out the door and sitting beside him. David was a plump boy who smiled a lot. Joseph shrugged glumly. "If it is any comfort to thee, my family does not approve of slavery," David said, "nor the states leaving the Union, and there are others in town who agree." "Well, there are a lot more who don't agree," Joseph said bitterly, "including myself." David's face held a look of guarded disapproval that made Joseph flush red with sudden shame. But the look disappeared in an instant, and there was only David's usual round, friendly face. "Then it is indeed unfair for thee to suffer for views thou do not hold true," he said in his quaint speech. He quickly turned the subject to more pleasant things, and in a few minutes the boys were talking like old friends. Joseph was surprised at how much he liked David. He too was fond of trains, and admitted with a shy grin that he was often in trouble for running off to explore along the river instead of doing chores. By the time Miss Graham rang the bell signaling the end of lunch, Joseph felt as if he had made a new friend. Several of the other boys glared at David as they walked in together. "Why don't you two move up north with the rest of your Yankee friends?" Ethan sneered. Joseph clenched his fists, but David calmly returned to his seat, ignoring the bully. "It is time for history," Miss Graham said, as soon as they had settled in their seats. "Ethan, please tell me all the presidents and the dates that they served the country." Ethan stood up and took a deep breath. George Washington, he began. 1789 to 1797. Continue, Miss Graham prompted. John Adams, 1797 to to Ethan shook his head. I don't remember the date. Miss Graham pointed to the stool in front of the room. Ethan slowly shuffled there and put the tall, pointed hat on his head. I did not learn my lessons, was written on the hat. The class laughed, and Joseph almost felt sorry for Ethan. Miss Graham allowed the laughing for another few seconds, then silenced them with an icy stare. Next, she called on David. Joseph's new friend took a deep breath. John Adams, 1797 to 1801. Thomas Jefferson, 1801 to 1809. One by one, he named them, ending with James Buchanan, 1857 to 1861. Miss Graham nodded. Excellent. I see you've been studying. The afternoon dragged slowly by. With Ethan glumly perched on the stool in front of the class, Andrew and his friends had a new target to torment, even though Ethan was their friend. They seemed to forget Joseph. At last, the school day ended. Before the bell had finished ringing, Joseph was out the door and racing up the street to the mill. He had been so upset on Saturday that he had forgotten to tell Zachary about the cave. In a few minutes, he could see the big stone wheel slowly turning with the flow of water from the river. He found Zachary hard at work loading heavy sacks of flour on a wagon. He seemed surprised and pleased to see Joseph. Two slaves worked with him. Joseph had seen them before, but he had never bothered to talk with them. Zachary, however, joked and talked with them as they worked. Samuel and Jefferson, the slaves, responded to Zachary in an easy manner, although they never looked at him directly. They fell silent whenever Mr. Young was about. Jefferson limped awkwardly as he bent under the heavy load. Can you get away? Joseph asked Zachary, explaining about the cave. Zachary glanced at his father, standing in the doorway watching them. Mr. Young was a short, powerfully built man with a brutish face. Rumor was that he often beat his wife when she was alive and his children. Today, however, he seemed in a good mood. He agreed that Zachary could go after he'd finished loading the wagon. Joseph grabbed up a sack to help, but to his embarrassment, found he could not lift it by himself. He marveled at the ease with which Zachary handled the heavy bags. Jefferson grabbed the other end of Joseph's sack, and they lifted it together in comfortable silence. How'd you hurt your foot? Joseph asked. The massa chopped off my toes, he replied simply. Joseph was so startled, he dropped his end of the bag. What, what did you say? He stammered. I heard my mama was sick, Jefferson said. She's on one of those big plantations about 10 miles from here. So one night I went to see her. When I got back, he cut off my toes. That way he figures I can work, but I can't run off no more. From the doorway of the mill, Zachary's father watched them with small, hard eyes. Joseph picked up his end of the sack in silence. He looked at his friend. Did Zachary know what his father had done? He must, Joseph realized. Then he thought of the rumors about Mr. Young's cruelty to his family. Maybe if you were around someone like that, you got used to it. Maybe you would get so used to it that even chopping off someone's toes wouldn't seem so bad. Another thought crept into his mind, although he fought to push it away. Maybe people had gotten so used to slavery they'd forgotten how bad it was.